The Gettysburg Address, November 19, 1863. President Lincoln traveled by train to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania to deliver a few appropriate remarks at the dedication of the National Cemetery. The presidential train carried Lincoln's secretaries Hay and Nicolay, as well as foreign dignitaries, newspaper reporters, and disabled soldiers. Three of Lincoln's cabinet members, Secretary of State William H. Seward, Secretary of the Interior John P. Usher, and Postmaster General Montgomery Blair also made the trip with the President. The Secretary of the Treasury, Salmon P. Chase, refused to go. Lincoln wrote Chase a letter trying to get him to go to Gettysburg. My dear sir, I expected to see you here at Cabinet meeting and to say something about going to Gettysburg. There will be a train to take and return us. The time for starting is not yet fixed, but when it shall be, I will notify you. Yours truly, A. Lincoln. Secretary of War Edwin Stanton, a Lincoln ally, stayed in Washington to watch Secretary Chase, who did not want to show public support for Lincoln at a political event like the cemetery dedication. Stanton would take on the responsibility for keeping an eye on the politically ambitious Chase for the president. Although Lincoln's speech was to be a few appropriate remarks and would be a lesson in how to rise above politics, he knew that his presence at the dedication would be politically important. Gabor Borat wrote in his book, The Gettysburg Gospel, Lincoln understood the crucial role of personal contacts in politics. A processional led the president to the platform, taking him past a crowd of thousands. Reverend Thomas Stockton, a Methodist minister and chaplain of the House of Representatives, opened the ceremony with a prayer. The drawn-out prayer, 4 times longer than Lincoln's speech, caused Lincoln's secretary John Hay to note in his diary, Mr. Stockton made a prayer which thought it was an oration. Then it was Edward Everett's turn to speak. His speech, as Borat explains, would recount the terrible and glorious history of the battle, explain its meaning, not really touch the horrors, include religion, women, and black people, and look with hope to the future. More than 2 hours later, it was finally President Lincoln's turn to speak. His first prepared speech since his inauguration on March 4, 1861 began, 87 years ago. Even though he was making a reference to the beginning of our country, audience members would recognize the similarities of these words with the King James Version of Psalms 90, verse 10. The days of our years are 80 years and 10. Lincoln had included references to the Declaration of Independence in other speeches as well. In his eulogy for Henry Clay, he said, on the 4th day of July, 1776, and in a speech given in Peoria, Illinois in 1854, he said, near 80 years ago we began by declaring that all men are created equal. His most recent reference was in July 1863. In response to a serenade, he said, how long ago is it? 80-odd years since on the 4th of July? He makes another biblical reference with the phrase brought forth. This could be taken in the sense of newborn children who were presented or brought forth for people to see. At the end of this sentence, Lincoln uses the word proposition to mean something that had to be proven. In this case, the idea that all men are created equal. This easily recognizable reference to the Declaration of Independence was a way for him to defend the Emancipation Proclamation. It was also a way to mention slavery without offending members of his audience and drawing criticism that he had desecrated the dedication. He continues, now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. Once again, we can draw the comparison between this sentence and a fragment from his war message to Congress on July 4, 1861, where he said, our popular government has often been called an experiment. 2 points in it our people have already settled: the successful establishing and the successful administering of it. One still remains: its successful maintenance against a formidable attempt to overthrow it. He then continues, but in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. In this sentence, he wanted to remind people that independence comes at a great sacrifice. It also gives us insight to his belief that he would be remembered more for the Emancipation Proclamation than for his 2-minute speech delivered that day. Lincoln finishes his speech: "It is for us the living rather to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us." The great task he is referring to is the continuing the war to victory. That from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause, for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain. He gives a universal declaration when he says that this nation under God shall have the new birth of freedom, and he incorporates Daniel Webster's 1830 reply to South Carolina's Robert Hayne with these words: "And that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth." So in this short speech he avoided mentioning by name slavery, Gettysburg, Confederacy, Lee's army, and Meade's army. Everett had already done that. He spoke in broad terms so that his audience could apply their own interpretations, and he accomplished the goal of capturing a broad, patriotic coalition of support for the war.